everybody. This is Heather with Erie Wellness Connect. We are on our 4th episode, and I wanted to bring on somebody that I met about 2 years ago at the Float Therapy Conference in Louisville, Kentucky. This is Raffaele Gianfrancesco from Roxiva. So, Raf, I wanted to bring you on here because the Roxiva is really new to our community, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about you because you fascinate me. And then B, dive a little bit deeper into the Roxiva, what it is and what it can do for people. So thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm a consciousness explorer, basically.
Okay.
I'm eternally curious. And at a very young age, I knew I was just different from everybody, really different. And not in a good way, because everybody was kind of normies all around me. Mm-hmm. And I just always kind of felt like the square peg. And it's been a whole lifetime of trying to figure out why people are the way they are, why we show up the way we do, and curiosity around the circumstances that really just create our day-to-day.
So before Roxiva, tell me about your background and how it even led to getting into, was Roxiva your first stop? Tell me about your history here.
Oh gosh, how long do we have? I have been many, many things. I guess what I should probably say out of the gate is that I have a trauma background. I have a trauma personality structure. My early life, very early life, and probably some in utero, was extremely stressful, extremely trauma-filled, and just kind of rough. And so I kind of built my brain around survival. And, there's a lot of studies now coming out in terms of, with these new technologies being able to do SPECT scans and really look into the brain and see how they're wired. And it's really being proven and shown now that people that have early trauma, basically we call it complex PTSD, CPTSD, have a different brain wiring than other people. Even people that have had trauma later in life, it's not the same brain structure that shows up, because the difference is that the brain gets wired to survive because the only option is survival, rather than a brain that gets wired to thrive or excel or be focused on something, a hobby, a passion, a good family, whatever. It doesn't do that. It's just always looking for threats. And so that doesn't just go away. So the reason I tell you all that is that I spent most of my life in 7-year cycles rising to the top of one profession or another and then blowing myself up.
Well, that sounds familiar. So do you think that's why you just always felt like a square peg in a round hole then?
Yeah, because, everybody around you is living this best life, or what you perceive to be a best life. And here you are with this internal dialogue and external structure that is just constantly threatening. So you know that you're different. You know that people around you don't have the same problems, as it were.
You bring up internal dialogue, and for me, I constantly have an internal dialogue, just all the time. I'm talking to myself or whatever it is. And I've come to learn, even just recently, sometimes I get reminded that not everybody has that. Is that kind of what you're referring to in that sense, or?
Well, everybody has an internal dialogue. It's just whether or not they're aware. So, if you go back to Carl Jung and the archetypes, and every one of us is made up of any number of personality structures that at any given time are in control of the entire complex. So it's like a committee in our heads. And that committee is made up of mom, dad, church, school, bullies, friends, institutions, advertising. So all of these things give us the programming that is so ingrained we don't even know it's there. And those are all little voices in our head. whether we actually hear them or not.
Right. I actually hear them, but and I guess I say that and why it really sparks something in me is because it's wanting to escape that internal dialogue sometimes, right?
100%. Yeah.
And it was truly, when I met you and the first time you put me underneath the Roxiva, I was able to stop that for a moment and
Right.
go into this flow of just being, and I think that's why I fell in love with it. So without getting into that structure right at the moment, how did you get into the Roxiva itself? Like, how long has that been? Tell us a little bit more. How do you even get into something like that?
Well, I mean, so where I was going with that whole long story before is that about 10 years ago, I was just turning 50 and I was like, I'm getting too old for this constant upheaval. So I started really focusing on therapy because I had been in therapy many times before in my life, but I was the kind of personality that I could actually manipulate the therapist and just, they would love me. They would, oh, he's so great, but I was bullshitting the whole time because I wasn't ready to face or talk about any of the real stuff. So, I did that for a while. Then I got into esoteric practices. I did Kabbalah for a long time. I went to an energy medicine school, got my master healer certification, and all of that stuff just kind of really showed me that I'm always just layering on top of my structure to try to make myself better, more acceptable, more pleasing, whatever, and never really getting to the core of who I am. So I would say it was around 5-6 years ago, I discovered psychedelics and, really late in life to come to it, but I discovered mushrooms. I discovered toad, which is actually 5-MeO-DMT, which is it's a venom of the Sonoran desert toad that you smoke basically, and it sends you immediately into another realm. And so doing these things, I also, in that process, learned how to do neurofeedback, how to administer neurofeedback, and became a neurofeedback practitioner, which I still am. And that's actually how I found this, because the combination of neurofeedback and learning about the brain and then the psychedelics allowed me for the very first time in my life to become disassociated enough from my regular personality structures and my internal dialogue to have some space to really look at, why the hell do I do that, say that, think that? And that was beautiful to finally have that occur for the first time ever.
Yes. That disassociate, the conscious choice to disassociate in an environment that, well, I mean, at that time you're not in full control, but right. So you're not doing it to escape. It's a journey that you're going on to dive deeper.
Yeah. I mean, initially it was absolutely to address trauma, to figure out how to get through this, to not be, I had an ex-girlfriend who I'm still friends with, but she would tell me that I would say something and her response would be, well, that's because you're dead inside. And she was really sarcastic, that's because you're dead inside. And I never thought about how profound a statement that was. I was dead inside. I had no feelings. I had no range of emotion. It was two things. It was fear and it was escape that I was operating in all the time. And everything else was just a temporary diversion, distraction, whatever. But the two things that were always there were the fear and the need to escape. And it just became exhausting.
So when I found you 2 years ago, I was a year and a half sober from alcohol. And I always thought I just did it because it was fun, but I'd been doing it since I was a teenager, right? And didn't realize I was escaping from my thoughts, my feelings until about 3 months into being sober. And I was like, oh, there they are. And what the heck? And I was escaping, most definitely. And
yeah.
So, but when you put me underneath the Roxiva for the first time, it was the first time that all of those feelings felt integrated with me, but yet at the same time, they weren't taking me over. Like there was this ride that just, it put me in this trance that my brain stopped and just accepted who I was at that moment. And that's why as soon as I got up, I looked at you and I said, sold. I have to have this. And I wanted to share it with my community here. So let's dive into the Roxiva itself, because I don't fully understand it, even though I've had it for a year and a half. I just know that whenever I do it regularly, I feel better. I actually break into song more often. It's really weird. And your presentation at the last Float conference about the awe and wonder was just fantastic. And it was a great way to describe what the Roxiva does when you're underneath that light. But tell me the science behind it, the light. What does it do?
So I'll tell you, for the people that don't know what Roxiva is, it's a device that uses flickering light. There are 16 independent light sources on the device, LED-based, warm and cool white, so that it projects pure white light. No EMFs, no UVs, just pure white light. And we modulate those 16 LEDs in different coherent patterns that correspond, in some cases, to specific frequencies, in many cases, to a variety of frequencies. And those frequencies entrain our brain using the visual system. Even though you're lying under the device or sitting in front of the device with your eyes closed, you are receiving optical stimulus through the closed eyelids. And people that do the Roxiva experience kaleidoscopic effects, sacred geometry, hallucinations, out of body, lucid dreaming, like any number of results. Sometimes the first time, sometimes it takes a few times to be able to get used to it. And so what's happening is we're shutting off a part of the brain called the default mode network. And the default mode network are three parts of the brain. I think it's the temporal, the parietal, and the frontal, that work together to create our sense of us, of me, and the ever-present voice that is in our head when we are not focused on something else. It's kind of the structure that gives us our framework. And that is the problem, because the default mode network was created out of our experience, out of our ancestry, out of our lineage. And so, it's a tricky subject, and I won't open the can of worms, but when we talk about free will, and what is really free will? Do we actually have free will? Well, it could be argued that as long as there are structures in us that we didn't program ourselves, everything we do isn't actually our own choice. And so the only way you're ever going to get to true free will and the true way to create meaningful change and to manifest purely out of a true sense of freedom is if we can turn off all of the influences. And that's what this allows us to do. The combination of the sound, which is integrated with the light and choreographed with it, and vibration pulses, which are also embedded into the audio track, which can be transmitted through a variety of different sound beds, vests, pads. Any number of things can transmit the vibrations. And that's why you see so many companies selling these sound beds now. We have all that technology wrapped in it together. But all of these things basically stimulate all our senses and, in a good way, overwhelm us so much that we are so fascinated, in awe and wonder, that we get to have a vacation from our normal chatter.
Yes, that just makes me so excited, because that is exactly how it all works. And it's just absolutely amazing. The lights themselves, I feel like it's almost very like an archaic sense of communication, but also like this futuristic communication source as well. Like it transcends all time, I guess would be a good way to do it. It just, the way it gets into your neurological system, and I don't have the words to describe it, but it's weird.
Well, I mean, you're saying it beautifully, because we are beings of light, and the universe is a function of light. We measure distance in light years. We talk about the Big Bang and what happened at the Big Bang. There was this giant explosion and then the light. And then we talk about the Bible and let there be light. And when somebody is happy, they're lit up. And, and so our language, if you really look at words in our language, these words have been handed down to us over many, many, many thousands of years. And the words started out as guttural sounds that corresponded to feelings. Mm-hmm. And we've always known, ever since, even in our DNA, when we were a one-celled structure in the primordial soup that got zapped and then realized eventually over billions of years that we actually exist. But there's always been that orientation to light. They're plants. If you put a plant in a room facing away from the light, that plant will turn to face the light. It will move. And why? Because it's coded in its cells that light is life, that light is good. Our central nervous system, the cerebrospinal fluid that flows through the central nervous system, has photoreceptors in it. Why would a fluid that's encased inside a dark spine and cranial cavity that never ever gets exposed to the outside world have photoreceptors in it?
So interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, it's the first language.
Yes.
Light is communication. Light is information. When the sun burst into being in the Milky Way, it informed all of the matter around it into how to organize itself into planets. And well, the sun formed the solar system. Milky Way galaxy is millions of billions of suns. But every one of those light bodies has its own information that it's putting out, and it's creating a world and worlds around it because of the information that it's putting out. If the sun goes out 8 minutes later, we're done.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. This is awesome because these are all things that I think and feel about things, but I never really vocalize it. So I'm glad I get it. This is part of the reason why I wanted you on here. So, okay, wonderful. So the light being part of it. So this is I like to explain to clients that this is a full immersive experience. So, and sometimes sitting underneath that light for the first time, I can see it in clients. Like it's a little bit of an onslaught at first, and you're kind of like, whoa. And you can see the clients laying there tensing up a little bit. And we try to tell them at some point, you just need to let go and go into the light. And usually about a minute or two in, you'll see that, okay, right? And then that's when they can start riding it, because that was the way I felt too. At first, I was just like, so what is the difference between, and I get this question a lot, because we're working with the brain waves and with some of the tracks, we're specifically trying to take the brain waves down, relax, all of that. How can you relax when it's a full immersive experience? Or how can you explain that to clients in that sense that you're getting there a different way than what we may commonly think that we need to get there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And the reason that is because very few people ever actually truly focus and truly go inwards. And that's why meditation is so difficult for people, especially now. There's an entire institute. I live in Providence, Rhode Island right now, and there's an entire institute at Brown University that deals with abreactions from meditation. Like people that freak out from meditating, because meditation is prescribed as this way to basically solve all your problems and become your best you. But what a lot of people don't realize is that if you take somebody that's highly anxious or has had a tremendous trauma background and tell them to just sit there and listen to their thoughts, they will lose their shit pretty quickly.
Yeah, I've had friends and a couple of clients who have sat underneath that light and they did not like it. And I know it's exactly because they could not let go. They didn't want to let go of those thoughts. Even though they want to, it's all they know.
Right. So basically, You said it perfectly, but I take it a step further with my clients when they're under the light and when I'm at shows and I'm doing demonstrations. I say the second you start to feel anything uncomfortable, blow out really hard. Just go. So why? Because most people that are anxious, the first thing they do is they hold their breath. Okay. And so when you tell them to take a deep breath, some people will take a deep breath and not let it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that furthers the problem. You could suck in as much air as you want. You could still die if you don't exhale.
Right.
Because it's a process. And what people don't realize is the out breath is really what drives the in breath. Mm-hmm. If you breathe out fully, you can't help but fill your lungs in the inhale because you've created that downward diaphragmatic motion. Mm-hmm. And so just the effect of that breath when they're feeling a little tension because of the lights being so blinky and so bright or overwhelming or whatever, primes them for that relaxation response. But, the reason that they're able to come relaxed despite all of that stimulus is that we do not realize how incredibly noisy it is in our heads, even though we don't hear it actually. Well, I mean, there are people that physically hear voices, and that's a whole other story. But there's a committee in our head. And the one thing that helped me heal the most in terms of when I was finally discovering my internal processes is I started asking myself the question, who's talking now? And so every time I have an impulse or a drive or a reaction that I need to question, is this the right thing? I ask, who's talking now? And I sit and I listen. And don't you know, I'll get an idea of, yeah, that was my mother. Mm-hmm. Or, Ma, I love you. But, hey.
But it's almost like you have to remove yourself, obviously, and be the one looking in instead of being. Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's like a coach on a soccer team or whatever, right? So that person mm-hmm. has more perspective of what you're doing out on that field than you have of that perspective when you're out on that field, right?
Yeah, because you're in it.
Yep. I almost feel like the immersive experience, the onslaught of all of that, combating chaos with chaos, fire with fire, right, gives you that different result as well, as opposed to needing the calm to make you calm. Like we had mm-hmm. said, that doesn't always work for everybody. I do massage and, we're always like, whoa, come and relax and come and be calm. But we get people on our tables who just absolutely cannot, right?
Right.
And so that's why I feel like this type of device would be good for those people if given a chance, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about the music itself. And then going into like, I know there's like binaural beats and the isochronic tones. I don't fully understand mm-hmm. those. I seem to draw more toward the binaural beats, but how does the music work? Tell us about that.
So I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to say that there's no binaural beats.
Oh, okay.
Binaural beats are a wonderful technology. They were developed in the 50s by Bob Monroe from the Monroe Institute, who actually basically, he may not have been the inventor of them, but he was the guy that made them popular. He started having out-of-body experiences randomly and without any provocation or explanation. And so he just started studying. And he happened to be a radio magnet. He had radio stations and a sound engineer. So he was actually downloaded some info during his journeys on how to create these states. And that's how he used binaural beats to do that.
Okay.
Binaural beats use the auditory function. They just work on our ears. Okay. But we didn't have the technology that we have now with light to modulate the suboccipital cortex, which is the entire kind of lower half of our brain that is allocated to sight. And it uses most of the energy that our brain uses because we are visual creatures. And so anything that's sight related, it has much more pathways and much more strength in our system than anything audio related. And, the inappropriate thing that I say all the time is, if I was given the choice tomorrow to lose my hearing or lose my sight, I would lose my hearing 100% of the time over my sight, because being blind to me is much more scary than being deaf, because we're visual creatures. Imagine the lights going out and never coming on again. So basically the visual circuits are much more powerful, and they entrain much faster, and they go much deeper into the brain.
Okay.
The isochronic tones are just basically low tones which support the frequencies that we're using. They're usually harmonics on the low end of the higher frequencies that we're using on the high end.
Okay, so
they're the visual.
So they're there to support the visual. What would you say and I absolutely love the vibration portion of it. I love that deep bass that happens. And so how does that support the whole ride?
So, I mean, the primary technology that has been identified that is at work in these sound beds and sound chairs is cymatics. And for those that don't know what cymatics is, you could take the image of that black plate that people put sand or salt on, and then they turn it on and it vibrates and it makes all of these sacred geometry type patterns depending on the speed at which the plate is vibrating, what the frequency is of that plate. So anybody that's interested, cymatics is a fascinating field. And cymatics does not just work with solid sand or salt, or those types of things, but it works with water. And there's been a tremendous amount of study. If you infuse certain frequencies into water, it can make really beautiful shapes and structures. So when you look at a being such as the human being that is 75% water at minimum, you realize that if you can vibrate that water at beneficial frequencies, you can have an impact on the cellular structures. And there's more and more and more science coming out now that shows that we don't just store our memories in our head. Our entire body is a mind complex. And when you go back into the Vedic and the ancient knowledge of chakras and energy centers, we learned that there are specific parts of our body that deal with specific types of emotions, feelings, and manifestations. And all of those have frequencies that are attached to them. So very quickly, you get into that frame of mind that Nikola Tesla had and said 100 years ago, that in the future, all medicine will be sound, vibration, and light.
I just got the chills on all that. Yeah, I know for us, I sell it in a way of, lymphatic drainage and all that. Getting that moved in your body is a really another benefit to all of that as well.
And it's totally doing that, yeah.
Yep.
And with the Roxiva, we're actually doing lymphatic work as well, because with sessions like brain baths and many of the gamma sessions that we have the ability to modulate the movement of cerebrospinal fluid so that it flows up into the brain and cleans the brain out and gets rid of all the gunk.
Yes.
It causes things like dementia and cognitive impairment and all of the things that we're running into now, which basically our brains are getting sticky because of all the sugar in our diet. Everything comes back to sugar, basically. I mean, I'm not going to get on a health kick here, but they're starting to call dementia stage 3 diabetes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Alzheimer's is like diabetes 3 because they're finding these sticky kind of substances that are mucking up our brain and causing it to short out.
That makes sense. That does not support my recent journey in eating a lot of sweet tarts, but one thing at a time, I guess.
Yeah.
I recently had a client ask me, well, so there's a few things. What are some, so I've had people ask me about bipolar issues, addiction issues. What are some things that a common client perhaps coming to us may use the Roxiva for, or maybe like they've tried so many other things and they'll give something else a try. What are some things that have surprised you that it's been able to help?
Well, I mean, I want to start the statements I'm going to make with the disclaimer that we are not a medical device.
Right.
We do not make any medical claims. We do not treat anything. We do not fix anything. And so that being said, human beings have an amazing self-healing process. I don't have to do anything if I cut my finger for that sucker to just clot up and heal on its own. Now, if my immune system is compromised, or if I have some sort of a disease, prevents my blood from clotting or whatever, that may not happen. But as a rule, we have the ability to heal ourselves quite easily. What Roxiva does is it supports all of the systems of the body. The central nervous system is everything. That's why it's called the central nervous system, because it's in the middle of everything. And there's more and more and more science showing up that is identifying that pain and illness have psychological and mental components more than anyone ever believed.
Yes.
If the placebo effect, the nocebo effect, where if you tell somebody that they have a disease and that you're an authority, they will develop the symptoms of that disease.
Yes.
Dr. Joe Dispenza has built an entire career around this concept. And, Dr. Joe Dispenza does great work, but his seminars are super hard to get into, super expensive. They take a lot of time, and we do all the same stuff with the Roxiva in less time.
Okay. All right.
So we're basically supporting the energy column of the human body by shining light into it, by modulating the mind, and basically, for a more technical aspect, we have science now that shows that we have specific frequencies that we generate in our sessions that work on the glial network and the neuronal network, and have the ability to create basically like an eraser effect and remove unwanted patterns. Now, you can remove a pattern and it will reestablish itself if you don't do anything else to change what causes the pattern.
Right.
So that's why people feel better. They go home and they get sick again, or their symptoms come back. One of the big things I hear is pain relief. My back doesn't hurt anymore. Now, usually it takes a couple of hours for them to realize that. Like, they get home and they're moving around. They're like, wow, I did that light thing and now my back doesn't hurt anymore. Migraines respond really well. I've had people get under the light with a headache or a migraine and get out from under the light and it's gone. And again, it's all pattern interrupt. Pain is a pattern. Pain and illness is a defense mechanism that the body creates because of some perceived danger or sin against the complex, whether it's existing now or has recently happened or happened a long time ago. That pain will remain to protect the system from that injury happening again, because just like Dr. Joe says, anything that happens with emotion attached to it sticks.
Yes. Yes.
And so that works on the negative as well. So these negative memories that have an emotional charge connected to them can cause physical manifestations. And that's why ketamine has become so successful. And, we're actually doing a lot of work with ketamine clinics now. They're acquiring our technology and working with it under controlled environments to administer ketamine and Roxiva together. And what they're finding is they need less ketamine because the Roxiva is doing so much.
Wow.
And they're bringing the clients in for alternate visits and not even giving them the ketamine, just doing the Roxiva session. Because ketamine, there are some challenges with ketamine. It is an addictive substance.
Okay.
And it also requires more and more for people to get the same result.
Right. Okay.
So anything that they can do to stretch out how much they need or how often they need to use it and still getting positive effects, it adds to the efficacy of that technology.
I've been exploring more and more about mushrooms. I've been doing some microdosing myself, which I have experienced some just amazing, my mood, my creativity, my problem solving. I'm loving just learning all of this and that this has come into my life within the last year and a half. For the Roxiva itself, what I love about it too is that it can help you produce the moods that you're looking for. So I feel like a lot of people out there feel like they just are who they are, like they can't control how they feel. And what I love about the Roxiva is that it gives you a tool to be able to produce the moods that you're looking for, or help you be who you want to be, right? Where was I going with that? I just think that's amazing. And I don't think a lot of people understand that they can do that they can help, they can, and then there's the brainwave compared to like your heart rate variability. Can you tell me a little bit about that as well? Like, so I try to explain to people, if you're trying to relax, doing something like this trains your brain so that when you need to on the fly, you'll get there quicker. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah. So, you've actually teed this up perfectly because, as I mentioned, I'm a neurofeedback practitioner, and part of neurofeedback training is learning what the different parts of the brain do, what certain frequencies occurring in certain parts of the brain show up as, whether they're adaptive, maladaptive, positive, whether they support general well-being or get in the way of it. So, basically all of that is super important. And there are brainwave patterns for happy. There are brainwave patterns for sad, and they can measure that using EEG and using different technologies. And basically, the thing that's most important is that with neurofeedback, we can kind of reward or inhibit certain behavior patterns by rewarding or inhibiting certain frequencies in certain parts of the brain. But the problem is you're not usually treating the whole brain entirely. With Roxiva, we're treating the whole brain at the same time when you get a session with the light session. And it creates hyperconnectivity between the left and the right part of the brain, and it creates hyper neuroplasticity so that the brain is primed to make new connections.
Yes. Yeah, you were talking about the left brain, right brain in that connection. How would you compare what's happening with the Roxiva to, like, which is really big right now in therapy, the EMDR that people are doing, right? What's the difference? Or I feel like there's a lot of same going on there. Am I wrong or am I right?
Well, so there's a few technologies that come into play when you're talking about using the eyes to address the brain. So there's EMDR, which is the kind of left-right motion. And really the way the person that discovered EMDR figured that out is that they were out hiking, and they realized that when they were looking across the horizon, when they were hiking, that it was very relaxing to them, or watching tennis back and forth. It's very hypnotic that way. And so it causes a left-right brain communication. And so that's all it is. It's relaxing, and it puts you into parasympathetic. Okay. Now the other one is brain spotting, which is kind of a newer technology. And brain spotting is where they have you look in a certain direction and hold your gaze there. Like they kind of move something around, and you're staring at that thing, and you kind of see what shows up when you're looking in that direction.
Okay.
And then they analyze kind of what's happening, and you make connections based on your visual field as to stuff that's going on in your mind.
Okay. So is the Roxiva doing stuff like that?
The Roxiva is certainly using the visual complex to disengage the thinking brain, but it's doing it in a much more direct and powerful way.
Right.
And it's so are you familiar with Sadhguru?
No.
Or Osho? Okay. So Osho was a very controversial figure. He was the guy with 95 Rolls Royces that got arrested and then killed. Basically, he was a guru up in Washington State. He came from India. And Sadhguru is now coming into his kind of popularity more and more and more. And one thing that they both agreed on, and that I agree with, is that our society has gotten too noisy for quiet meditation, that we can't just drop in the way other civilizations had been able to in the past, because we've got so many more distractions, so much more information coming in, and we have so much more of a sense of overwhelm than any of these other civilizations prior to us. So what they did is they came up with a thing they call active meditation, where you either dance around or jump around or roll around or get all kind of physical and crazy, and then somebody yells, "Stop," And then in the middle of all that action, you stop. And have you ever like done something really strenuous and then stop doing it and you could like literally feel every part of your body?
Yes.
And there's like this hum in you.
Yes.
And that's the basis that you start the meditation in, when you get into your body.
Right.
Because we're not in our bodies anymore at all. And that's because our heads are so busy. So you would think, well, so if I blink this thing through my eyes, isn't that going to take me further out of my body? Don't you do out of body experiences? One of the things that can happen is these types of travel and journeying. But depending upon the program selected, we have many programs that are very embodying. We've got Schumann resonance programs that put you into the resonance of the earth. Right. So it depends on what session you select.
Right.
So it's all on the table. It's all on the table.
Okay. All right. What would you recommend for somebody that may come into my practice, knows nothing about any of this, but they want to relax? How do they how do they feel comfortable doing this? Like, how would you describe this to somebody who, in lay terms, how do we sell it to people?
So really, you have to sell it differently to everybody because everybody's starting at a different place. Yeah. So really what you have to ask them is what is their goal for coming to you? You know, what's happening? What's
right.
You know, I like to use the magic wand example. If you could wave a magic wand and, you know, everything would be perfect, what would that look like?
Right.
Because the Roxiva is a manifestation tool. It is a way to take energy and convert it into matter, because that's what we are as human beings. We take energy and we convert it into matter. And so we're manifesting every minute of every day. So I just tell people it's a magical manifestation tool. If you come in with intentions, they will happen.
That is perfect. A manifestation tool. That's exactly what I needed. This has been amazing, Raph. I really appreciate you coming on here, explaining more to me. I don't have a whole lot of people that I can have these discussions with, so this is super helpful for me and my staff. Erin absolutely loves and adores the Roxiva. You've met her at the last Float conference. So I'm hoping the more I can educate my community and my clients, take down that barrier of, oh, this looks kind of weird, right? And let them know the possibilities that could happen.
Yeah, and you know, float spas have been amazing. I mean, they are certainly the largest concentration of any particular industry that have the Roxiva. And, you know, specifically because it's another way to get to the place that float brings people. It doesn't require as much time or all of the kind of physical, you know, getting undressed, taking a shower, getting in the tank, taking another shower, you know, and all of that. So, you know, yes, people should definitely float as much as possible, but there should also be other ways to get to that space. And, you know, Chris, who's on the board, Chris Wardlaw, who's on the board of the Float conference now, he said it the first time he got under the Roxiva, but this puts me at the same place that I get to in an hour and a half float instantly.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. We've done it with people with massage, getting them to the same place. So, yeah. Well, I'm so happy that I found you. I'm so happy that I went to that Float conference a couple of years ago, and I'm excited to introduce this to the Erie community and to offer them a different way of just being and manifesting. So thank you so much,
Awesome.
Rob. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
All right.
Thank you for having me on, Heather.
Yep. And I'll be seeing you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.